Hi, and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast with Grant and Louise Bentley. We have run the Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy since 1995. We are both qualified practicing homeopaths, and Grant is also a naturopath. Together, we discovered a link between energy and facial structure based on traditional ideas from homeopathy that have roots going back 200 years. This project is called Homeopathic Facial Analysis, or HFA for short, and has been the cornerstone of clinical diagnosis and training courses since 1999. Between us, we have written and produced 7 HFA books, including Soul and Survival. Soul and Survival is the philosophy of energy influencing matter and how this energy forms individual facial structure, our unconscious drives and fears, our life patterns, and universal time cycles.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this next episode of the Soul and Survival podcast. And today I have with me David Kelly, who's an acupuncturist and has been involved in alternative therapies for how many years, David?
About 35.
Okay, so tell me about acupuncture and what got you into it in the first place.
For me, it was personal experience. I'd had a car accident in my mid-20s, and I basically never quite recovered from it. I used to get pain between the shoulder blades, and I'd get muscle knotting the size of a golf ball. And over a period of 5 years, this got progressively worse, to the point where I was in agony and vomiting from the pain. I could only work an average of about 1 to 2 days a week, then I'd have to take time off to rest. So anyway, I'd tried everything. I'd been through naturopaths, physios, gyros, medical doctors. Nothing seemed to be helping, and someone suggested, why don't you try acupuncture? So I did. I decided, well, I'll go and try it, and 3 weeks later I was back at full-time work.
It's pretty hard to argue against, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, so what do you think's the magic? Why did that work for you when other systems didn't?
Really, it's hard to say why. From a theoretical point of view, acupuncture uses a completely different view of how the body functions. So the idea of pain in Chinese medicine relates to stagnation of what they call qi, the qi being the energy flow that moves through the body, and that energy is what activates and enables all function within the body. So pain is the result of stagnation of that qi, which when the qi stagnates, you can also then have the blood stop moving properly as well. And even things like that tightening, if you like, that's a sensation of stagnancy in that local muscle. You just can't move it. So acupuncture had methods of relieving that stagnation, getting the circulation, the energy to move through that spot. And once that started to move, then natural healing began to actually occur. So I had problems for some time. It wasn't as if it was a perfect fix at the end of 3 weeks, but the problems that would occur would also recover quickly, and then I found myself able to get back to work properly again. And then over the years, eventually the back problem was completely eradicated. So,
wow,
yeah.
That's impressive. So when you talk about the qi, give us an understanding of, in your mind, what is a good definition of qi?
I would say that qi you consider as a functional, energetic process. So qi provides for certain, we know it by what it achieves rather than by being able to identify the substance. It's a bit like most of us know about electricity only by its benefits. We don't really understand, most people don't understand the physics of electricity. Well, the physics of acupuncture isn't understood at all. It's a field that at this stage is still under a lot of study. But acupuncture's qi is recognised by the fact that when the flow of qi is there, then you have warmth, you have circulation of blood, you have healing of tissues. If any of those things are not there, then the qi is not there. And so you recognise problems by looking for imbalances of function and determining whether the function can be restored by restoring that flow of chi to the body.
So in homeopathy, we have the vital force, and the vital force is essentially just life energy. Is that what you mean by chi? Is that what the Chinese system means?
I would say that's a pretty reasonable similarity. I think each person has a little bit of a variation on the concept of chi, but in Chinese medicine, you could say all energy forms both matter and action. So they talk about yin and yang. You've probably been aware of that. And so chi is partly yang. It's on a continuum. It's not as yang as, say, pure heat or light. But it is somewhere between that kind of energy and also a material function. And that's one of the reasons, because physics doesn't have a definite definition of it. We just have to go with the traditional theories, and they've been used for well over 3,000 up to 5,000 years. The concept of these acupuncture meridians that the energy flows through, and the concept of the energy has been evolved and developed through usage. And who knows how else they discovered it. Some people say meditation and things like that. Some people say that the theory was started from people who were sensitive to pain and injury, and they'd feel it as if the chi was moving or wasn't moving in their own bodies.
Right.
And interestingly, when you do acupuncture, you often find people who will describe sensations of movement, and when they do, they often describe it along the acupuncture channel, the pathway that the chi flows through.
This is the meridians that are in some books?
The meridians, yeah. And those people don't usually even know that that's what they're describing, but that's what they are. You can see it when they describe it.
So when you talk about there was stagnation in your back, essentially if chi is flowing through the meridians in the free manner that it should, then health is the outcome. And if it's stagnated or diverted or misappropriated in some way, that's when pathology begins, or is that too simplistic?
No, I think that's pretty reasonable. The start of all pathology from our perspective would be the obstruction of this flow of chi. From that point on, all functions begin to diminish in one way or another, either through excessive accumulation in some areas and then depletion in others. So you could say that there was an excessive accumulation where the muscle knotting was, but in other areas there would have been a deficiency. So probably cold areas in other areas below that and in different areas of the body. So yeah, if chi stops flowing smoothly and in a balanced manner, then health starts to decline.
It's interesting when I hear about acupuncture, because clearly we're both working in that, you know, that there's a bridge between the refined energetic and the material and the chi or the vital force, and if I'm wrong, let me know, but it seems to be that bridge between the two. It's energetic in its design, but it's energetic with a material purpose. It doesn't a vital force, at least as I understand it, doesn't really have any sort of greater soul-like purpose. It's there to animate the body. It's there to act. It contains within it the laws of how, you know, self-regulation, self-healing, so on. It's the animation of the body, but it isn't necessarily your spirit as such, you know.
Yeah.
In fact, it isn't even your mind. In Hahnemann's in the Organon, which I know that you're familiar with via Robin, who's a homeopath, your partner, and in Aphorism 9 there, Hahnemann definitely says that the vital force is different from our reason-gifted indwelling mind, meaning that it's a kind of a program. It's the thing that makes your stomach digest food. It's the thing that makes your skin heal a wound. It's all of the non-conscious but a programmed thing. And I'm just wondering, is qi roughly equated with that, or does it contain more or less than that?
There's certainly relationships, I think. I would agree with what you're saying, that it's not spirit as such, that there's higher, more pure energy. Qi is, in some respects, I think of it a little bit as the border between matter and energy. It possibly even fluxes between the two, whereas spirit is more of a higher, it's more energetic, it's less material than what I would consider qi.
Yeah.
And interestingly, if you think about, they often talk about the Indian chakra system and energy in that, and I would say that's more to the spiritual side.
Yeah.
And though there's parallel in acupuncture, some of the central body points that run down the front of the body and around the back of the body, you could consider those as having relationships to the main chakras of the Indian system, but I consider them again to function more as a physical adjustment than as a spiritual process.
It also seems, excuse me, mainly because I suppose homeopathy was developed out of a medical mind. But acupuncture seems to carry with it a lot of agricultural almost terms, with the wind and the fire and the wet and the damp and the everything else. It has a natural world element to its descriptors. Do you think, knowing homeopathy as you do, knowing that you're not an expert in homeopathy, but do you think that point of difference is a benefit, or do you think by comparison that it depletes, or it's just a point of difference?
I think it's more just a point of difference. The point of understanding does have an effect though. So as an example, for instance, the Chinese medicine tends to look at holistic patterns. It looks at, you talked about the processes of heat and cold and wind and things like that. These are, the Chinese observed nature in function in the world around them. And so based on their cultural level, the technologies and things, that was pretty easy for them to decide that when they saw problems in the body, they saw the same kinds of problems they could describe the energetics of in the surrounding area. And I often think one of the biggest differences, they never developed study into the microscopic levels. So they learned to do all of their medical work by observing the life itself, not by cutting into, pulling apart and examining the physical structures. So where their healing is strongest is in dealing with not so much structural stuff, but more of the functional processes. So when they see a functional imbalance, then they can work towards correcting it, but they would not be as useful, for instance, as a lot of the modern stuff in dealing with a broken bone.
No. But what it does do is that I think this is a benefit that acupuncture has over homeopathy, is that it may be its own fashion of diagnostics, but it still is a diagnostic. Whereas a lot of homeopathy has no diagnostic at all. It's reliant on, if it wants a diagnosis, we need to send patients off to conventional medicine, because we need to, we measure the effectiveness of our remedies against the medical model, So we're kind of, whether we like it or not, homeopaths are sort of linked to conventional medicine, even though they seem to be very antagonistic towards each other. Whereas the acupuncture, as I understand it, it may have its own terminology and its own diagnostic outcome where it says, this is my diagnosis. You have wind and cold in your liver or whatever it might be. And it doesn't mean to, if I'm sounding patronising, I don't mean to be. It's only because I don't understand the system. But that to another acupuncturist tells you a fair bit. I mean, I'm assuming. Whereas for us, I mean, a homeopathic patient can leave me. They can go and tell another homeopath what remedies I gave, but not necessarily why I gave it.
Yeah, that's true. In traditional Chinese medicine in particular, the pattern recognition is an important part of describing pathology. So it is very systematic. It has structure to it. That structure has been tested over hundreds of years. We use the same descriptions, the same treatment points, because they've been found to be effective. And it has its own diagnostic system. We don't need any Western diagnosis to make a Chinese medicine diagnosis and to treat what we see from that diagnosis and the presentation of the patient. You know, of course, with all things, the modern trend a little bit in this process is to try and bridge the two. So many people try to determine Western science approaches to how to use acupuncture. But my personal experience of 35 plus years in the clinic, as much as I would pay attention to the Western science studies and evidence, in the clinic, it always is far more practical to use the traditional approaches to understanding diagnosis and treatment.
Right.
So yeah, Western medicine actually can be completely ignored from our perspective.
Right.
I wouldn't recommend that it be completely ignored, but from a treatment point of view from Chinese medicine, you could.
Right, right. That's in. So, as mentioned earlier, your partner is a homeopath, has been for what, about 3 decades? Or,
Yeah,
in fact,
30,
I
31.
studied with her.
Yeah.
So she's been a homeopath now for 34 years.
Yeah, something
like that. You've seen her at work. You've seen me at work. What do you think are the strengths of homeopathy over acupuncture, and then conversely the strengths of acupuncture over homeopathy? Do you have any?
Yeah, I think when it comes to one of the strengths of homeopathy over acupuncture is, I think homeopathy, when it precisely gets the remedy, I've seen it work effects much more powerfully and much quicker than what I've seen acupuncture. This is, of course, going to be somewhat controversial depending who you're talking to. There'll be plenty of acupuncturists who would like to disagree with me.
They'll be screaming at you.
But the reality is, my experience with homeopathy is sometimes the treatment results seem almost miraculous, you know, and sometimes extremely rapid. I've seen that more frequently in homeopathy than I've seen in acupuncture. You hear stories and you do occasionally see results like that yourself in acupuncture, but not as much. However, on the other side of the coin, acupuncture has systematic methods of assessing a person, and the symptoms picture can be less of an issue. And I found some common illnesses and things like, let's just say, even a common cold in some people's cases, the remedy can be harder to pin down from a homeopathic point of view, but the imbalance is easily treated in a Chinese medicine point of view. So it's one of those things. There's a bit of both, but yeah, I think, and it, you know, maybe it's how good I was at acupuncture. I don't, you know, maybe I wasn't as good as some people.
No,
but
I'm sure you would have been. You're a pretty diligent sort of guy. But it's I think you're right in that last bit, and this is what I was trying to achieve with the development of HFA, was that I think systems that have subjectivity like homeopathy, are really strong because they allow a lot for patient involvement. But at the same time, if it's purely subjective and no objectivity, and the only objectivity that homeopathy has up until age of 8, the only objectivity is just understanding that the symptoms are getting better post the remedy. But pre that, there's not a lot of objectivity. And I think that, because you guys do tongue diagnosis and pulse diagnosis, so those external, non-subjective things, I think put you in good stead personally.
Yeah, it is a little bit different, I think, in some respects. We also are very hands-on too. So a lot of the feedback about what's going on is through what we feel, and I don't see that is as strong a point with homeopathy. Counter to that, of course, is that homeopathy can often be achieved at a distance by, online and things like that. You can't stick an acupuncture needle in someone
that's exactly
online.
it. Yeah.
So it's a bit, there's quite a difference that way.
Do we use mind and emotions a lot? We see. I know all alternative practitioners will claim, even if they don't sort of practically use it, they theoretically know that they should be treating in this holistic way. Homeopathy is one area, though, that really does cater for it, and it almost demands it. So we want to know the lead up to the energy drain that led you. Let's just talk about chronic disease, for example. We know that, let's just say you start developing a chronic disease at age 40, you were fine at 30. So something's happened between 30 and 40 to make that body be drained of energy to such a point where your body's natural healing process doesn't have the energy to be able to keep that whole healing and regenerative momentum going. So it's been seconded somewhere. Your energy's been seconded somewhere. Either it's via hard work or worry or whatever it might be. It might be grief, could be anything. But we cater for that. So we would include, let's just say that somebody was in a happy marriage, a partner died, and then a few years later that you have developed arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. Now, homeopathy as a system will cater for that grief, or it will cater for that anger, or maybe a complexity of emotions as an outcome of that death. Now, does acupuncture also include that kind of mental emotional content?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, perhaps the way we would look at it might not be quite the same, but the essence would be very similar. So I often have a saying that I talk to patients about, and that's that emotions are actually energy in motion.
Mm-hmm.
So we think of it as a very energetic, or I think of it as a very energetic process.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're sort of talking about to me is that some form of stressor is draining the system. Mm-hmm. So that's a depletion process. Mm-hmm. From an acupuncture point of view, we don't usually go back. We're not psychotherapists. We don't believe there's any benefit in digging up the past to try and work through it particularly. Mm-hmm. Though when you do acupuncture, you often release those sort of things. As an example, for instance, that you may have someone who has had an emotional pain, some kind of incident has caused them a pain emotionally. And just like physical, if someone punches you in the solar plexus, everything tightens up and hurts and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Well, those emotions can become blocked and cause stagnation and a lack of chi flow smooth chi flow throughout the body. That can remain locked in to some degree for lengthy periods, years perhaps. And when you start doing acupuncture, you may be treating one thing, but it starts to release some of those blockages. And we'll have people who will often experience emotional effects, maybe anger or tearfulness or something like that, and there's no apparent reason for it. And I often explain to them that if you have that happen, just let it flow through, because what it is most likely is that you've had a traumatic event, and that the emotion of that event has been trapped within your system by this tightening and the body trying to protect itself. The acupuncture is causing it to release and flow, and as it does, you sense it as the emotion again. But it should wash over fairly quickly and then go completely, and you should feel a lot lighter and freer afterwards. And so you do often see that. You sometimes see it on the couch, and when people are treated, you'll see them suddenly start tearing up and crying and things like that, while the needles are actually working.
You see that, you hear those sort of stories even from other body workers like masseurs and so on, where they're not actually actively engaged in any sort of psychology or psychotherapeutic analysis of, they're not asking the person anything about the lead up to their tension, just the release of it is automatically working on the primary trigger in the first place. So, and that's an important point. It is an important point to understand that because too many times I think we understand the concept of holism, but then think that holism is a one-way street from mind to body, when in fact it's a two-way street, which is why it is holistic. You can work on the body to influence the mind.
It's interesting because one of the things that I came to understand from Chinese medicine is I didn't really see this concept of mind and body that is talked about in West. In the West, we've got, that's a psychological problem, that's a mental issue. There is no such thing in Chinese medicine. It is always a issue of the body and the circulation of qi. The mind can't function if the qi is not running smoothly. So we never actually separate that's a psychological disorder and this is a physical disorder. Which is something that's quite different from the West. They say, oh, I can't treat you, the GP sends you off to someone else because you need psychological counselling and stuff like that. We don't actually feel the need to do that for most people.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I guess you could say homeopathy is the same, because I have patients where I know something's up. You can tell something's up. I mean, well, for a start, something's up because they're in your clinic, right? So, I mean, you know that there's a problem somewhere. But just because if you go back, when did all of this start? Tell me a little bit about the circumstances. They might say, oh, well, I first started developing this 5 years ago. And so I'll sort of, okay, look, give and take a couple of years. Tell me what was going on in your life about 7 years ago. And then you can see sometimes they will just shut down and go, I don't want to do that. And I know there are some homeopaths that will then turn around and they'll say, well, you've got to open up, because if you don't open up, I can't help you. But that's actually not true. You can just sit down there and go, I will say to people all the time, look, just to a point where you feel comfortable, you tell me the lead up. And if you want to stop, because I can get this from another angle. And I guess that's what you're saying. You just come at it from a different angle.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't need to dig up the past. In fact, I often think that can potentially aggravate people. If you keep reliving memories, they tend to embed to some degree. You could look at it and say that you're causing a qi flow in a particular way that can become conditioned into the system. So. That again could be a bit controversial. Not everyone might agree with me on that part, but that's been my experience, that I don't really need to delve into it. We often treat problems with, say, sleep and other things like that, and you may look back and find, yeah, sure, they went through a stressful divorce or some other event that's occurred, But all you really need to know is that there's deficiencies in the energy that balance and help with sleep, the particular organ systems. Because, I think you might be aware, Grant, that each of the organ systems in Chinese medicine, there's a meridian that runs and connects to each of those systems, the organs. But each organ itself also reflects virtual emotional qualities within the person as well. So one, for instance, is if someone's living in great fear for whatever reason, it will drain the kidney energy. And in Chinese medicine, the kidney energy is really fundamental to growth and development. So it can have long-lasting and permanent effects on a person if they're, for instance, living in a fearful state as they grow up. The lack of joy has a somewhat different effect, but it can also affect, make their heart weak, make them timid, these sorts of things. There's a very strong connection between all of the emotion, mind and body, which, as I say, you don't tend to separate them in Chinese medicine.
So you expect to see changes in that mental, emotional sphere, even though you're not directly asking about it. You're not delving into it as a cause, but you do expect to see an improvement into it just simply because you're dealing with it's almost like you're going upstream. You're going to where the pathology is solidifying in the body simply via that stagnation, and then you're releasing that stagnation and it will have that upflow effect. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way of looking at it. The Chinese medicine, I think I've lost the track a little bit there.
That's okay.
Sometimes.
It was probably my question and the way I explained it. So tell me where I might be wrong with this. Now, this is where I'm going to be really biased. But to some degree, I think homeopathy could be slightly more valuable. And the reason for that is, and this is where my ignorance might come in. So I get the impression that when you are putting the needles and trying to stimulate these channels and these meridian areas, that you are almost rerouting a river. It had been dammed up and it was all turning stagnant, turning into a billabong, and now what you're doing is that you're recreating that stream so it's fast and it's a free-flowing clear water stream again rather than a backwater. Now here's my question. Well, one, you might say that's not even true, but here's my point. It's still the energy of that person. Now, the one thing that homeopathy does do is that it takes energy from an external source and gives it to a now energy depleted body. So I'm not reliant on that energy depleted body trying to do the right thing. I'm actually supplementing it from what its loss is. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So first of all, am I right? And B, do you see that as like, are we better than you as well? No, I don't mean it. But what's your thoughts on that?
If I understand what you're sort of putting out at the moment, is that homeopathy carries the energy within its treatment, its remedy, and so when you give someone that remedy, if it resonates properly with the person, it's providing them resources for them to correct the problems and to rebuild their health on.
Yeah.
Acupuncture works to some degree in a similar way, in the sense that there's always been the theory that it's not a process of just the patient. There's also the practitioner. So the practitioner's intention is often considered to be just as important as what the actual needles are. And so it is possible that energy is being provided by the treatment through the practitioner as well. And the second thing is that we absorb energy throughout the system. The body's one of the ways is obviously breathing, but when you get that movement, open those channels, it allows body energy to increase naturally. So acupuncture can be used to tonify. Certain parts of it, like more physical tonification, nourishing blood, for instance, or nourishing the loss of tissue where it's declined, things like that, then you would often use herbal medicine, which has a lot of relationship to the theoretical medical principles of Chinese medicine. But instead of, you're applying a physical resonance process in that sense, and not so much through the needles. You're more of a reflex rebalancing that's going on in the needles. So I always saw acupuncture in Chinese medicine. I would always look at acupuncture was better and quicker for rebalancing. But when a person's imbalanced, they're imbalanced. If you ever think about, if you lose your balance, you collapse in a heap. All right? So if you establish balance, then that person's in a stable state to heal. Herbs are more useful for building tone and muscle. Like we need food, we need substance to rebuild the body. So from that point of view, I would say homeopathy has a rebalancing effect in the energy it provides, and hopefully if that rebalancing effect is enforced often enough and accurately enough, then the natural processes of having been rebalanced allows the body to absorb what foods, fluids and aspects of nourishment that it needs to rebuild itself as well.
Well, I see it that we're not even. Yes, that's true. So I should preface this because yes, you're absolutely right. Once you're in a state of balance, then you're going to be able to draw out not just the physical nutrition, but the energy that you need from both food. Yeah, we're talking about lack of joy. See, to me, there's a few areas where we get energy from. Food is clearly one, exercise and the release of energy from the muscles is another, because that's where we store it. Another one is sleep, obviously. But the last one is joy. I mean, a lack of joy in life. How many people who are depressed have got a lot of energy? I mean, they just don't. And so that joy or that involvement in life and it with other people and being able to be stimulated like that is a really important part of energy coming back into the body. And as we know, I mean, this is one of the big problems with, trying to go solar and so on, that you can only store energy for so long, and then the sun has to come out again and off the cycle goes. But so when with homeopathy, essentially the principle in chronic illness is that, and this is where it becomes a little bit important to us to know where the deviation of energy occurs, because what we call the vital force is essentially the program of life that is involved in cellular repair, cellular growth, and just basic health generally. But that energy can be seconded into a fight or flight response. It can be seconded and used for anxiety, overwork, grief, a whole range of different things. And that the body can withstand that for a little while. But then there's also genetic factors where there's these weaknesses, weak areas of the body. And if your energy is being seconded, those weak areas of the body will require a little bit more energy, daily energy plus a bit more in order to keep them in good optimal health. And when you start denying those needy areas, that body energy, because it's going into these other areas like either lifestyle, drugs, a whole range of negatives that are burning it up, then the remedy becomes really important because what we're doing is well, as you know, the body sees everything in terms of self and non-self. And so the sum total of the whole kind of background colour group combined with the presenting signs and symptoms makes us able to select a remedy that is going to be taken in as self-energy. And then from that self-energy, our body now has at least a little bit more of a surplus that it can now, so it's almost as if the vital force or the defense mechanism still knows what to do. It's still a program, it's still going about trying to heal, replenish and replace, but it just doesn't have the energetic resources to do so. But that's why I was wondering about, with acupuncture, the immediate transfer. Now I understand what you're saying, that a healthier person will then bring that energy in from other areas of their life, and slowly but surely that supplementation will take place. But is there an immediate, here you go, here's your starving body, here is your energy supply to this energy starved body?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the areas I find perhaps a little bit hard to define yes or no to. Chinese medicine talks about tonification. So with an acupuncture point, you attempt to determine whether there's an excess or a deficiency at the actual acupuncture area. And you're trying to use different techniques. Some techniques put energy in, and other techniques cause you to be able to draw it out. So if the imbalances, there's too much energy stuck in one area of the acupuncture meridian, you can drain it. Sometimes you can drain it through other channels into complementary meridians, if you like. So sometimes you're re-shifting the energy, not necessarily increasing it. But in others, it's possible that the points themselves absorb energy. And that's something that I can't comment as a definite fact, because it's too subtle to actually tell. So you're giving something that you believe carries the energy, but equally the energy is surrounding us all the time. So opening the channel point could simply be allowing energy into the point.
Right, okay.
Which is a different approach to doing it. I know there was a bit of work done at various times with some of the European homeopaths and acupuncture people, combining the two, where they'd apply a homeopathic remedy to needles and stuff like that. Yeah. Now, I never personally did any of it, and I'm not commenting one way or another about its effectiveness, but again, there is this idea that sometimes energy comes into the point itself.
Right. Right. Okay, so that would explain then how you get... because on the surface, to someone like me, it almost seems like acupuncture is a bit of a closed circuit system, but I hadn't taken into account that surrounding energy, and now the openness of these channels allows that. Right, okay, gotcha.
So in a way, I guess you have to ask, why is there an acupuncture point there in the first place?
Right.
And it would seem to me that those points connect the broader energetic fields around you to the body.
Right.
They're like communication points. And so when you adjust the communication, you're saying, we actually want to increase the energy here a little bit of this type of energy. So, the kidneys we talked about before, if someone has been fearful and they've become depleted, then you would use points that we know to be source points for that energy. So those points will increase the energy in the channel. It probably is more... It's hard to say how much that energy comes in. But we do know, for instance, acupuncture, my observation is that after about 3 days, if you do a treatment, the treatment gradually seems to decline over about 3 days. And then if you treat the process again, it's like stepping upstairs. The first treatment, it steps up and then it declines a little bit. And the second treatment, it steps up, but it steps up higher. And then it declines a little bit, and then the third treatment steps up higher again. And so you keep stepping up improved levels of energy over the time. But that's why with acupuncture, you'll often do multiple treatments within, a few weeks and stuff, whereas with homeopathy, you're doing the multiples by daily dosing or similar things.
Well, again, that's going into that whole energetic model. In our body is the battery, and we just drain it. And if we're not giving a regular supply, then you will end up with that shortfall. So how does acupuncture overcome that? We can overcome that by giving a remedy on a daily basis, or what I judge is going to be a time period of which I think you're going to need another dose. But when you've got something so mechanical and hands-on, I mean, obviously people don't want to come back every second day or whatever, or is that the nature of herbs? Is that why you include that?
That's personally why I tended to use herbs. Herbal medicine, there's often herbal formulas that will sort of be very similar in their impact to what you would use from an acupuncture treatment. So you might do a prescription of certain points for achieving a certain result. There'll be herbal formulas that do exactly the same thing. So a herbalist focuses on that and perhaps doesn't use acupuncture at all. And people like myself, I focused more on acupuncture, but I supplemented with the herbs to try and provide that lengthier period. Most of my patients would come in maybe once or twice a week for the first few weeks, then they'd stretch out to weekly or fortnightly, that sort of thing. And once you get balance back, the natural healing processes take over. This is I think what you see with, you don't need to keep going continuously. Quite often you'll see fairly rapid improvement in conditions to the point where the body sustains itself. Now, if you have someone who's continually stressing it, it's a bit like you were talking about before. If their life circumstances keep draining it, then that's going to need to have more effort put in, either more continually taking herbs or more frequent acupuncture.
Or the practitioner and the patient need to lower their expectation if it can't be changed.
Yeah. I mean, when I was in China, they would often treat daily. But their circumstances and the way the Chinese culture was there, it was easy for them to come in. It was done in a hospital. They'd just come straight in. We'd do the acupuncture and they'd be out. But they'd come in every day, and you might do 10 days treatment and then take a break for a bit, and then they'd come in for another 10 days treatment.
So TCM, the herbal aspect of it, seems a little bit like Ayurveda. Because when I was doing the naturopathic course, I should keep closer to the microphone there. Well, when I was doing the naturopathic course, we were looking at herbs essentially because of their biochemical structure. So you really, this herb would have methionine in it, and it'd have choline in it, and it'd have cysteine in it, and so as a result of that, it's going to be a good liver tonic and all that. But whereas I'm just wondering whether or not TCM, not saying that doesn't happen, but there seems to be perhaps a more energetic approach to what herbs can do, not just that real biological function.
Yeah. I mean, in Chinese medicine, the herbs were all analysed according to the principles of Chinese medicine. The principles are the same as they are for acupuncture. So each herb will actually enter one or more meridians. There's an occasional herb, for instance, the licorice, which tends to enter all meridians. So that was often added to virtually every formula because it helped to smooth out the effective treatment. And just a small amount would make a herbal formula work more smoothly and with less side effects and things like that. But certain herbs would enter into the heart meridians or to the kidney or to the liver or gallbladder meridians. We also take a lot of attention to the energetic movement of the herb. So unlike the Western thing, they may give a particular substance for a cold, something like horseradish or garlic.
Yeah.
But in Chinese medicine, we go one step further. We know that certain herbs have benefits in colds or flus.
Yeah.
But we also determine, is it a hot cold or a cold cold? So the response of the body, the symptom picture alters slightly depending on what's going on. And in Chinese medicine, you try to avoid giving a hot herb in a hot condition. If the person is showing signs of sore throat, excessive fever, things like that, you would avoid herbs that actually are warm, because they could aggravate it. And so you would look for herbs that actually have a cold nature and take the heat out. It's allopathic from that perspective. In homeopathy, you have the homeopathic effect. But in Chinese medicine, when there's too much heat, we apply cold, and when there's too much cold, we apply heat. From a herbal perspective in particular. But even in acupuncture, we'll often heat the acupuncture point with moxa to warm it, and directly, that's another point I hadn't thought, but we directly put energy in, and sometimes large quantities of energy, using the moxibustion to heat the actual acupuncture point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But the herbs themselves are stimulants as far as qi goes, or relaxants. I mean, they're designed to work on the qi. They're designed to work on the energetic body as well, which makes it sound perhaps a little bit more sophisticated than the way that we do. If not sophisticated, more complicated than the way that we were taught, which is looking at it really from its biochemical building blocks and then just applying it.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, the Chinese medicine, the herbal formula, some of the formulas we would use are 4,000 years old.
Yeah.
They had no idea of biochemistry.
Yeah.
So they understood the formula through its effects, not through any chemical studies or anything like that.
Yeah, so there's a whole incorporation to the philosophy of its use.
It's my understanding that Chinese herbal medicine is the most sophisticated herbal medicine out there, though I would perhaps say that maybe the Ayurvedic is in a similar part.
I don't know enough about it.
I don't either.
Maybe we could get somebody on to explain it. But so look, I like a lot of herbal medicines, but like I said, we would do things like, somebody came in recently with a bit of an eye complaint, glaucoma and high pressure in their eyes. Now we would do, say, something like some bilberries or things like that were high in bioflavonoids. So it helps with it helps with the regulation of the pressure by increasing the integrity of these really tiny vessels. But you can see that it's all pathological. It's all very biochemical and pathological, whereas I like that TCM one, the way that you explain it. There's a lot of thought that's gone into it, and it's more encompassing, I think.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Chinese herbal medicine is it has this... it has concepts of superior and inferior herbs, and what I mean by that is the superior herbs are actually tonics that they build the body, they build its health and strength and immunity, and it's a concept that doesn't really exist in Western medicine at all. But the inferior herbs are more like Western drugs. They have strong toxic effects. Sometimes they shouldn't be used too often or too strongly dosed-wise. So you have to select carefully the inferior herbs, but the superior herbs are like superfoods. They can be used safely and in large quantities. In fact, they're often put into Chinese cooking. They would often use astragalus and things like that, which are tonics that would be used in their soups and stuff. They'd eat them literally. They were like food.
They're interesting, and when I was talking to Sandy Dinsdale, we spoke about this. I mean, we spoke about the constitution and how a lot of alternative medicines have the constitution, which is what you're talking about when you're talking about a tonic. have that at its base, trying to improve the constitution generally, and just how Western medicine really doesn't have any sort of concept anymore, at least, of the tonic for the constitution. It's very specific, which I think is to its detriment. It's loss not doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the stuff I've looked at leads me to think that they may be beginning to come back to looking for things that boost and benefit.
What is it that makes you think that?
Just looking at some of the approaches to understanding immune stimulants and things like that they're doing now. So I've just felt that they may be starting to move back. But for a long time, I felt the biggest problem with the way they approached things compared to the way we looked at things was it was slash and burn. Everything that they do is you either cut it out or you kill it. You poison it or cut it out, or they didn't have this concept of support and nourishment.
No.
But as I said, the Chinese superior herbs literally form superfoods.
Well, if we're going to, if how we were saying earlier about if we're going to call part of the philosophy of acupuncture as an agricultural model, then the conventional medicine would have to be a military model. It is.
Yeah.
It's about searching out who and where the enemy is, and then striking it and killing it, which is great if it just does happen to be a fungus or a bacteria, but if it's you and it's your thought process, or it's your own lack of energy due to lifestyle and so on, it becomes painfully obvious that there is a real weakness in their system.
Yeah, and in fact, the treatment process itself can further weaken the person and make them more susceptible. So one of the ones that I used to commonly see was you would treat urinary tract infections. And they'd be coming to you maybe because they've had 5 urinary tract infections in the last 4 months, and then they've been on antibiotic after antibiotic. And my feeling is that usually they haven't had 5 separate things. It's one thing never treated properly. And so you would deal with that, and you would leave them in a state where they were stronger, they weren't getting any more, whereas the antibiotic was actually making them more susceptible to problems. And the same thing, without repairing and restoring properly, you can cause that to occur, that you weaken the person and make them more likely to get ill again afterwards, rather than leaving him in a stronger state. There's an interesting thing about a Chinese description I heard once about the difference between Western and Chinese medicine, and they said, if you imagine that the problem is like a thief stealing into the house at night, Western medicine is kind of like you pull a gun out and you blow their head off. And Chinese medicine is like you make a hell of a lot of racket and noise and you scare the pants off them and they run from the house. When the Chinese medicine is finished, there's nothing left to clean up. The Western medicine leaves a big mess to clean up.
Okay. All right. That's a good analogy. It's an interesting analogy. All right. I think we'll leave it there. And so, David, as always, it was wonderful, and thanks for your time.
No worries. It's been a pleasure, Grant.
Okay. See you, mate.
Thanks for listening to Soul and Survival. If you are interested in more information, books, courses, consultations, learning more about facial analysis or life themes, please visit our college site, Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy, vcch.org.